Delta Waterfowl is the voice of the Duck Hunter podcast. On today's episode, I sat down with Ray Penny Jr. and Ben Haff to discuss the storied history and recent resurgence of the American-made decoy company, G&H Decoys. With 2% of every purchase supporting waterfowl, conservation runs deep at G&H. With that introduction, let's bring in today's guests. Ray Penny, Ben Haff, welcome to the Delta Waterfowl podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Joel.
So, Ray, you're the CEO and president of G&H Decoys.
I am.
Not going to bury that lead. And Ben, you are the director of sales.
That's correct.
That is awesome. So G&H is a familiar brand to me. I suspect it's a familiar brand to many. I think one of you guys, did you ask the question last night at the banquet, who shot their first duck over at G&H Decoys?
Yeah, that was me. That was me.
How many hands did you get?
We got a few. I didn't take the time to individually count, but busy room, a lot of people talking. But I felt like of the folks that were paying attention, I felt like we had more than half of them put their hand up.
That's amazing. That's a great question. That's a bold question.
It is a bold question, but there's a lot of folks who got started on their dad or their granddad's G&H Decoys. It was such a ubiquitous name for so many years, and the thing that we hear over and over. I mean, how many times did we hear it today, where people come up to the booth and say, "Oh man, my granddad still has those decoys and they're still in the attic and they still look great. And I got a lot of fond memories." And there's just this connection. It was one of the things that appealed to us when we decided to try to take the company and turn it around, was that there's such a human connection to the brand and to the product. And, it looked at different opportunities to do different things in the outdoor industry, but never found anything where people had so much connection and so much identity to a brand as there is to G&H. And we love that because it gives us these opportunities to have all these interactions, talk to folks, hear the stories, learn about the way people are doing things, and interact with a product that we might not otherwise have gotten the chance to have.
I'm going to consider the three of us pretty lucky right now. The show shut down for the day. So there's a quietness in the air that is really pleasing to my ears. I have to mention that. I can't let it go. But I want to get to know the men behind the company. I want the listeners to get to know both of you as people. Ray, do you mind if we start with you? Can you give a little bit of your background, your upbringing,
sure.
Your career track? You have an interesting career move.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm originally a native Houstonian. And grew up in Houston and hunted the Middle Texas coast as a younger man. And I'm a bit of an adult onset hunter. Didn't really start duck hunting until I was kind of in my early 20s. And went to school at Oklahoma State University, met and married the love of my life. Went back to Houston and worked for Orvis for a few years. And I'd always wanted to be a United States Marine. And so I called in sick to work one day and went down to the recruiter and literally just signed on the dotted line one day. And then went home and told my wife that I had joined the Marine Corps. And went all over the country, did that for 7 years. Wonderful experience. And finally, our family had grown, decided it was time to maybe settle down and stop being gone all the time. And so we made the decision to move back to Tulsa to be near Maggie's family. And in Tulsa, went back to school, went to law school, worked as a first job out of law school as a prosecutor on the gang and organized crime unit at the Tulsa County District Attorney's Office. It's the only job I ever had that was just like the movies, where I got to go on raids with the SWAT team. I wasn't kicking in the doors, but I was there to help collect evidence and interview witnesses and advise the cops on how we needed to put the case together. And then I would get to take those cases and try them at jury trial. And I got to try 14 felony jury trials in 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah, just had a great time. And eventually made the decision to go into private commercial practice, a lot of civil law stuff, business law. And that was fun and exciting and lucrative. And the G&H thing kind of fell into my lap. And it was one of those deals where I felt like regardless of, we didn't know what was going to happen. You can't see the future. There's no crystal ball. But I didn't want to get to be age 65 and say, man, I wish I had tried to turn around G&H. I wish somebody had done that, or I wish I had taken that opportunity. And so I made the tough decision of going to the partners at the law firm and saying, thank you for everything you've done for me, but I need to go chase this. And so they asked me to I still have a desk at the law firm. I don't go there hardly ever. They call me with, questions about the stuff that I specialize in. But G&H is my day-to-day.
I do find it interesting in that, you put out an announcement for a new position that you want to hire someone. You get a certain set of applications. You put that advertisement out 3 months later, you're going to get a different set of applications. Because
Sure.
not everyone is available at that moment. What was it about your life that made you available to switch from law to, I'm going to be the CEO and president of G&H Decoys?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of weird things happening in the country with COVID, and COVID kind of created a weird opportunity for G&H to come back that it would not have otherwise had. The shipping crisis, the fact that, when the lockdown happened and COVID happened, all kinds of people went back outdoors. And a lot of these same guys, and we've heard this story a bunch of times, a lot of these same guys who had those old G&H Decoys, and maybe they hadn't picked them up in 15 or 20 years, they had a son who said, Dad, we've got those decoys in the garage. Can we take those out and try to hunt with them? And I think that for a lot of people sparked sort of a renaissance of getting out and duck hunting again. So the demand for the product was there. The shipping crisis was preventing a lot of our competitors from getting their products into the United States, and it kind of created this window where we looked at this and thought, okay, this is viable. At the same time, my legal career was in a place where I had kind of established myself. But this unique opportunity was here, and there wasn't anybody at the law firm that said to me, don't do that or you can't do that. Everybody kind of universally said, like, yeah, I would probably make the same decision if I was in your shoes. And so, the factors all sort of, I don't mean to get, all religious on your podcast or anything, but I guess the Lord just put all the pieces in place on the board to make it possible for me to take the opportunity.
The only rule of the podcast is, surprisingly, no swearing.
We've managed to abide with that so far.
I was going to say maybe I don't need a mic.
And it's not my rule, but probably not a bad one.
It's a great
Probably
rule.
not.
No, it's
yeah,
a great rule.
yeah. So, Ben, let's get to meet you.
Well, thanks for having me. Man, I guess I'll start where Ray did. Kind of like we started together. I was an Oklahoma State grad as well. And, at that time in my life, I was a wildlife ecology major and wanting to work in conservation and work in actually wetlands development is what I thought I was going to do. And so, believe it or not, I worked for Delta shortly after getting out of college. And it was a term job, and it was a good job, and we worked hard, and I enjoyed it, and I got to work with ducks every day. And that was really where I knew I was headed. I knew I wanted to be around waterfowl, wanted to be around people, but for me it was about hunting and about what I could do to make hunting better and how to be a part of the natural resource. And, that summer when I was working for Delta, I was also sending applications around the country trying to get a more permanent position somewhere and be part of something. And lo and behold, Oklahoma Department of Wildlife offered me a job to be an Oklahoma game warden. And it's interesting now that I look back on it, because at that time in my life, I wasn't sure I was the kind of guy, and I'm going to use like air quotes here, that should be in law enforcement. Because, as a young man looking over it and seeing a uniformed officer, I kind of figured this person was rigid and really straight-laced and really everything was, by the book. And at that time in my life, I wasn't living that way, and I didn't feel like I had the right personality to go out and, be some kind of tough guy. And I definitely didn't feel like I could go in a courtroom and make any kind of case or anything like that. But I had applied for the job, and I knew an Oklahoma game warden that served to some extent as a mentor for me, and I thought the career itself was interesting, and I definitely saw the value in what those enforcers around the country are doing to protect our resources. I was also working with a lot of really, really talented young scientists at Delta who were probably going to be way better as a biologist than I was, way better as a wetlands manager, way better studying ducks and understanding. And I recognized pretty quick, maybe my skill set is better used somewhere else. So I took the job at Oklahoma as a game warden, and I never looked back. And nearly 20 years went by in a couple blinks of an eye. And I tried to continue to follow my passion for waterfowl the way I worked, and the projects I tackled, and the training I sought, and the expertise I developed. And without going down a podcast in itself on that, by the time I was ready to leave that position, I was one of the guys that spent a lot of time in the marsh working duck hunters, being around duck hunters, for the protection element of it, and also to be an asset for those guys. A lot of folks, especially now, getting into the outdoors is new for them, or they're waterfowling, some folks will say, is a young man's game. And you do see a lot of people that get exposed to hunting somehow, and the next thing you know, they really buy into waterfowl hunting. And I think it's the social element for the most part. But the short version is there's a lot of guys in the field that just need someone around that can help. And I, for a long time, enjoyed being out there with them. You know, if they were causing a problem, I was going to solve it, and I knew the community wanted that. But also the guy that was novice and needed some advice, or, you know, something as simple as I'm there to make a license contact, and I can tell the poor young man's just set up completely wrong, or there's a glaring mistake, but they literally don't know it. And so during the course of a license contact, you can see the problem, and you can realize that they might ask for help. Well, you know, would you give us any advice, or is there a better place to go, or whatever. So they would often open that door, and I always enjoyed being a part of that. And then for fellow officers, I tried to take my interest and my expertise and pass it on. There toward the end of my career, I did a lot of training. I was part of a team that wrote a course about waterfowl enforcement, and we tried to be proactive and help wardens that had been around a long time and wardens that were brand new both get better at being in the marsh and helping, you know, with the enforcement that goes with all the regulations for hunting waterfowl. So I'm proud of that. I was excited about that. And we'll tell you a real short story, but how did I get to G&H? How does somebody go from being an Oklahoma game warden in a very comfortable career, very happy career, feeling like you're making an impact? How do you switch gears? The short version is I was getting to the point in my life where there were other things tugging at me. You know, raising kids, being a bigger part of my community for certain things. That law enforcement career is very demanding. Emotionally, it's demanding from time standpoint. So I was looking for something else to some extent. And I took a guy hunting who was a retired Oklahoma game warden. He was actually the game warden in the county where I grew up. And he doesn't duck hunt a lot. He thinks he does, but he really doesn't. But he crawled in my boat one morning, and we drove out to a place, and we're throwing decoys out in the lake. And in the dark, he's got a headlamp on. He looks down. He says, "Oh, these are G&H decoys," like it's some proclamation, you know. And I said, "Well, yeah, Carlos, that's what I hunt with. You know, I'm from Sand Springs. The factory at Henrietta is only about an hour away. For no other reason than just a local connection, I always felt proud to rep G&H and hunt with them. And they held up for me. They were a great product. I mean, I've got some now that I had in high school. So I tell him in that moment, yeah, this is what I hunt with. This is almost exclusively what I own, and I've been using these a long time. Well, he never says another word. And later in the hunt, he mentions the decoys again, and he says something about, "Did you know they're turning that place around?" And I didn't. And I said, "No, I hadn't heard that." I said, "In fact, I was assuming they were going to be out of business any day, because it was very obvious to anyone, you know, who looks for decoys, who buys decoys, and especially folks in Oklahoma, that the company's footprint had all but disappeared. You weren't in a dealer. You didn't see them in the magazine anymore. Even working, I didn't see any new ones in boats anymore. You know, I'd see some old ones. But anyway, he tells me about this guy named Ray Penny that he knew from working in wildlife prosecution and working at the courthouse. And he said, Ray Penny and his team, they're gonna turn that thing in. They're gonna get their hands on it. They were well underway of acquiring what was G&H and starting this project. And he says, "You ought to meet Ray." So Carlos lines up this meeting. And, you know, and in that conversation, when he tells me about what Ray and Ray's team were trying to do, before I knew what I was saying, I'm telling him, you know, I want to be part of that. I don't know what I could do to help, but I got some ideas. I think I know where we could get started. And through Carlos, Ray and I met, and I shared some of those ideas with Ray. Turns out Ray had already been hearing that for months and months and months. I didn't have anything profound that I said, other than that I was willing to be some kind of help. And you hit the fast forward button, here we are.
Well, there's a good detail that you passed over, and that's that we actually met for the first time at a Delta banquet in Broken Arrow.
That is true.
Oh, really?
That is true.
And the funny part of the story is that I brought my wife to the Delta banquet, and Carlos was there. Carlos, I think he got a table for us. Is that what he did?
There was a table, and there were some extra tickets. That's
we
right.
pulled Carlos in to help us with G&H, and he got a table for us, and there were some extra tickets. And so we walked in, and my wife Maggie and I were standing there, and this guy sitting next to me here with the red beard, fit-looking law enforcement guy walks in, and he sees my wife, and he goes, "Maggie," and Maggie says, "Ben," and I said, and at first I'm thinking, who the hell is this rascal that just walked up here and talking to my wife? And discovered that this was the Ben Haff that I was going to meet, and then discovered that I guess the connection goes way back, because Ben used to date my wife's college roommate and best friend. And so Ben's known my wife since they were, middle school kids.
Well, absolutely. We dated, when we were very young, actually way back into early high school. So, and I the time when Carlos said, I have a friend named Ray, that connection wasn't made. So I didn't know I was coming there. And right off the bat, obviously he's married to Maggie, and I've known her at that point for 20-something years. We had an immediate connection, and just like a spark in dry grass, man. The flames started flying.
So
taking off.
that was the moment.
That was the first piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it was, give me a warm fuzzy, too, because my wife said, yeah, I've known him for a long time. He used to date my best friend, and he's a stand-up guy, and you can trust him. And Ben did have a lot of great ideas. And the thing that I had never considered, we didn't have anybody we'd owned the company for a couple of weeks at that point. We didn't have anybody that was yet picked to do the sales job. And we can talk about what was going on at that time. But at this point, we were still just trying to dig through 89 years worth of garbage in the factory to figure out what we had. We bought the thing sight unseen with no books, with no records. And so we still putting a lot of pieces together. And, Ben shows up and he's like, Carlos is like, Ben would be a great salesman. And I thought, okay, game warden, he didn't have any sales experience, which turned out to not be true at all. But then I realized, Ben said, he said, look, I've looked in thousands of duck boats. He's like, I know what the trends are. I know what decoys people are carrying. I know how they're using them. I know how people want to rig them now. I know where they're hunting. And it's true. Ben had 17 years at that point of experience. I mean, decades as a hunter, but solid 17 continuous years of looking in people's duck boats and seeing, what are the trends and how has rigging changed, and what does a good keel look like on a decoy versus a bad keel on a decoy. So Ben's not only great as a salesman because Ben can go out there. I mean, what is sales? Sales is just figuring out what the need is and meeting that need. Ben can go to our customers, our retailers and the stores that carry us and say, based on your area, this is what I think your customers are buying. Let's fit your store with the product that will sell the best. But at the same time, we've made a lot of product development decisions in the last 18 months, 2 years. And Ben's, I guess you're kind of the de facto director of product development too, because Ben has all these ideas about, wait, do this, don't do that. And 9 times out of 10, he's right.
I have to back up. Do you remember the project that you were working on for Delta?
I do. We were dragging the prairie with chains and studying that success.
Who was the student that you were?
A guy named Matt Piron.
Yeah.
Would have been about 2006.
Yep. I started at Delta in 2001, so I was actually very much a part of that from the trapping side. Tried to maintain independence from the student simply because you're doing a management action and you want the student to study that management action without bias or without leading someone to a conclusion. So, yeah, well, that's awesome.
It was fun. I have very fond memories of that experience. I grew up in Sand Springs, Oklahoma. Both of my parents worked. We didn't do a lot of world traveling. We didn't a vacation for us was a weekend at the lake 30 minutes away. So for me to pack a bag and spend a long summer in North Dakota, I might as well have been in Africa.
Oh, I bet. I bet, yeah. Yeah. So I would imagine that there's a lot of American pride listening to this podcast, and so we're going to go there. G&H Decoys, both the oldest and the only decoy company manufacturing in the United States. Is that right?
We like to use the word major manufacturing because there's no doubt hand carvers. There's no doubt some project guys that are doing some really cool work around the country. But we're the only major manufacturer building duck and goose decoys left in the U.S.
And not just that, but that has 100% of our manufacturing in the United States. There are some companies that have some manufacturing in the United States, or they have some assembly in the United States to get parts. But we go from, you can see our booth from where we're sitting right here. We go from the raw plastic pellets and paint components. It's not even fully mixed paint yet. We do that mix inside our own factory. We go from those raw materials to the finished decoys that you see people walking away with today from our booth, all under one roof in Henrietta, Oklahoma.
How do you guys, boy, rabbit hole diving down it.
Sure.
How do you compete? Everything I hear, cheaper overseas, go there, bring it back, sell it for a higher profit. How do you compete with that? How do you stay relevant?
Some of that is what Ray mentioned right off the bat. There have been some trend changes. Some of it's customer demand.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest factor. We do see a trend in the entire outdoors industry, fishing included. There's a nature among a lot of people right now to buy something a little better quality, something they're going to get longer use out of, and they're not afraid to spend a little more money on it. And the best example I can give you, and I'm not in any way sponsored promoting it otherwise, the Yeti cooler. Mm-hmm. Not that long ago, to ask someone to pay nearly $400 for a cooler seemed absolutely ridiculous. But look what that company's done. And look how many other companies have followed that path. And there's some, I don't know how many brand names are out there with a really tough, durable, high-quality cooler.
Yeah.
Not that long ago, we were buying a very inexpensive, nearly disposable cooler every time we needed one, right? And look at that entire shift. We're seeing that in waders. We're seeing it in camouflage and clothing types. Fishing industry sees it. We've inherited some of that general nature. Folks are hungry for something to perform better and perform longer and to be much more dependable and durable. So that's what we already made. That's what G&H Decoys are. So they do cost a little more money. That helps. I wouldn't say we're really competitive. If a business is looking at carrying our product and they're just making decisions on dollars and cents, we're not competitive.
Okay.
We're going to be the last one they pick up. They're going to make less money on our box of decoys than they will something else. The difference is if they don't have our box of decoys and that's what the customer wanted, then the customer doesn't come in the front door, they go to the neighbor's business. And so they don't get the sale at all.
Yeah, right.
And that helps a lot. The other thing was, like Ray mentioned with COVID, the shipping, I'm going to say shipping crisis, that showed how sensitive we can be when all we're handling, all we're using, all we're selling are things that we're waiting on. Such a major piece of the puzzle, such large, so many logistics involved in shipping. You're at risk if that comes off the rails.
And I mean, Ben's hit the nail on the head, right? Those are probably two of the biggest factors. People demand and they want a better quality product, and we have that reputation for durability and quality that goes back decades. I mean, longer than Ben or I have been alive, and so people know that of all the decoys that you can go out and spend your hard-earned money on, you know, look, we're not the cheapest, we're not the most expensive decoy, but we're also not the cheapest decoy out there. If you buy in our decoys and you're spending, let's say you're spending the same amount, right? So a dozen of our new Premier Series Magnum Mallards is going to cost you $229 from the store or from our website or wherever you buy it. If you're paying the same amount for a decoy, and let's say you're only getting 3 seasons out of that decoy, math in public, you're spending, I don't know what, $70-something a year for those decoys. If you're buying our decoys for the exact same price, but you get 10 seasons out of them, you're spending $23 a season.
True.
It's a whole lot. It's also less work. It's less hassle, and I think the customer understands that, and that's a real driving factor for our product. And that, I think, another piece that Ben didn't talk about a whole lot is a lot of that American-made pride has really been coming back. I think in the last few years, people care about where their dollars go. They care about what happens to the money that they spend. And I think that people are willing to pay a few extra dollars for a good quality product if they know that that product is supporting. I mean, we employ several dozen people in Henrietta, Oklahoma. Those people get paid a paycheck. They go to the local grocery store. They go to the local coffee shop. Their kids, buy clothes at the local clothing store and in the shoe store. And that money goes out through the community, and I think there's a lot of people nowadays that feel good about spending their dollar. People are more conscious about the way they spend money. They feel good about spending their dollars in a way that makes an impact on their community, and not only that, but makes an impact in conservation. The whole history of our company is that we were founded in 1934. G&H stands for, before we started rolling the tape, I think you were talking about not knowing what the origin of the name G&H was. G&H stands for Gazalski and Hutton, and the company was actually founded as B&G Goose Decoy Company for Buchanan and Gazalski, and the Buchanan family regretfully went belly up in the Depression. The company was founded in 1934, and the factor that caused John Gazalski to start the company was that FDR signed the Duck Stamp Act, which made it illegal to use live birds as decoys anymore. And so this guy, and how he got the idea in 1934 Oklahoma, which was the dead middle of the Dust Bowl in the Depression, but he thought, man, I'm going to make decoys for people. And so he started making these goose. He got a patent for a papier-mâché goose decoy. And the goose shells that we sell, different materials, times have changed, right? But the contours for that decoy are identical to the 1934 contours that John Gazalski came up with. He started making these decoys. They became so popular that people would start writing to the Henrietta, Oklahoma postmaster and saying, please deliver this letter to the Henriettan that makes those decoys. And that's why the product became known as the Henrietton. Buchanan his family went belly up in the Depression, unfortunately. John Gazalski made the decision to go to his father-in-law, J.V. Hutton, and ask for some seed capital. And so his father-in-law joined the business, and G&H stands for Gazalski and Hutton, son-in-law, father-in-law. And the business grew from there. John, eventually, Mr. Hutton passed away. A few years later, John ran the company successfully for decades. He passed it on to his son, Dick Gazalski, and Dick passed away shortly before we acquired the company, a few months before we bought the company. He passed away in January of 21, and we ended up buying the company from his estate in December of 21.
Was there an interruption in production?
So there was, and you asked earlier about what kind of created the opportunity for me to get into this. I happened to be headed to court in a town called McAllister, which is just down the road from us, and I had to drive from Tulsa past the decoy factory. And being a Houstonian and living in Tulsa, I have driven past that factory hundreds of times over the course of 15 years. It's possible that it was thousands of times, multiple times a year to go see my parents. And I had always begged my wife, can I please stop in the G&H factory? Please let me just stop in there. And she would never let me. It became a running joke. If we would drive past the factory at midnight on our way back to Tulsa, she would say, the kids are asleep. Why don't you stop in there in the G&H factory and you can pick out some decoys for yourself? So it became kind of a running joke. And so finally I decided on the way to court in McAllister, I said, I'm going to stop in there. I don't have anybody in the truck with me. I'm going to stop and go in. And I went in, and the showroom was falling apart. The taxidermy literally looked like zombies. It was rotting off the ceiling. The ceiling was caved in. There was this nasty old fountain that was all mildewy and gross. It stank in there. And I thought, man, did I walk into an abandoned building? And Derek, our general manager, walked out. He's still with us. And I introduced myself. I shook his hand, and I said, what's going on in here? I haven't seen your product in stores in years. You're not in the Max catalog anymore. You're not in Cabela's anymore. What's happened? And he said basically that the company had fallen on hard times. They had shuttered the factory, I think 3 years before. Is that right, Ben? 3 years they had shut it down. They hadn't made a product. They were just selling existing stock, and they were down to 2 employees. It was Derek and a bookkeeper, and they were just struggling. I mean, they were making just enough selling existing stock to pay their salaries and pay enough electricity to run 2 offices in the little office complex on the front of the building there. And I don't know what possessed me, but without even thinking about it, I whipped out my business card from the law firm, and I handed it to him, and I said, well, I'm going to buy this company. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anybody else in an ownership group with me. I didn't know Ben yet. And he said, okay. And I said, please give this card to the owner. I'd really like to talk to him about, because in that moment I thought to myself, there has got to be a way that we can turn this thing around. This is an American institution. And that was in October of 2020, I think. Yeah, it was in October of 2020. Didn't hear a word. And then I was working from home that one day in January, and I happened to type into Google, and I thought, let's just see what the deal is with this old man, Dick Gazalski. So I typed into Google, Dick Gazalski, G&H Decoys, and the very first search response was his obituary, and he had died 3 days before.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, oh no, missed my chance.
That's why he didn't call me.
It's over. It's done. And it made sense why he didn't call me either. He had passed away. I literally jumped in the truck that day. I drove down to the factory, and I walked in, and Derek saw me, and I said, do you remember me? And he said, yes. And I said, how come nobody called me? And he said, just the old man was sick, and he was dying, and lots of other things going on. And I said, what's going to happen? And he said, nobody knows. And so he gave me the phone number for Dick's lawyer, who was handling his estate. And I immediately called that guy, and I think those guys got sick of talking to me over the next 2 weeks. But the long and short of it was that, Joel, they were just going to chop it up for scrap. There was no plan. They were literally going to scrap the metal. They were going to have a big warehouse sale. You could go buy equipment. You could buy decoys. You could buy whatever you wanted, and they were going to fold the thing down.
Wow.
And so, the chess pieces kind of came together in the right spots on the board. We put together an ownership group. We raised the capital to go purchase the company, and then it took us a year to close on. It's a whole separate podcast, is the year that it took us to close on the business. But we bought the company, and then it was me and Derek and a bookkeeper, and then it was like, okay, now what? And we had to go out. I mean, I was going to the Taco Bell and asking people at the Taco Bell, did you used to work at G&H? And the guy was like, yes. And I said, I'm a crazy, you never met me before. You have no idea who I am. Here's this crazy story I'm going to tell you, and we'd like you to come back and work at G&H. And this guy, Jeff, he looked at me really funny, and he said, he put his hand up, to sort of gesture, and he goes, "One moment." And he turned around and he ran in the back. And I didn't see him for like 5 minutes, and I thought maybe he had ghosted me or he thought I was crazy. And then he came back out of the back of the Taco Bell, and he said, "Okay, I just quit. When do we start?" So the response from the former employees was like super strong right away. People believed in it. They wanted to come do it. We didn't have any trouble at all putting the band back together. And so we got people back to the factory, and then we spent between January I think we got to working on it on January the 12th, and we finally turned on a machine to make a decoy sometime around the first week of May. And we hauled off 9 40-foot roll-offs full of garbage out of the factory. We had to strip and take apart and rebuild every machine to get things working again. We had to figure out how much plastic we had. We had to find the molds. We discovered molds that we didn't even know we had purchased. Stuff from, molds that were that M4 decoy that we have, and we actually decided to continue making them. That M4 mold was cast in 1962.
Wow.
And so it was a huge amount of labor, but it was a real labor of love, and everything kind of came back together. That rebuild, though, gave us the opportunity to focus the company once again on the quality that had made us popular all those decades ago. There were a number of years when the company fell on hard time, and we hear this. We've heard this numerous times today. When we're going to hug this. This is not something we're afraid of. There were a number of years when Dick Gazalski was trying to save the company, and he thought that the correct choice was to put less plastic in the decoy and thin the paint and try to reduce costs to make himself more competitive from a price perspective. The market was probably different then also. And so as a result of those decisions, there are a few years of G&H Decoys where the quality was poor and the paint didn't stick the way it was supposed to, and the keels cracked in some places, and the plastic was thin in a lot of spaces. When we did the rebuild, though, Derek, the general manager, he agreed to stay on. That was one of my real things, was like I wasn't going to do this if I couldn't keep Derek there, because he knows so much about what's going on.
How would you start from scratch like that?
Right, exactly. Not possible. And so Derek went and got Dennis. Dennis is now in his 37th year with G&H. Is that right, Ben?
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Went and got Dennis, went and got some of these old hands, and they all universally agreed, we don't want to do this if we can't do it right, and we can't go back to the way that we used to make them 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so I said, yeah, no argument for me at all. And so when we rebuilt all those machines, we reset everything to pour a thicker shot of plastic. We found the old paint recipes. We started to mix the old paint recipes the way they used to be mixed. So kind of what you see now with our new products with the Premier Series is the first new product that the company's had since 1996. We're using all of the old methods that existed before 1996. We're using all of the old paint recipes. We're using all of the old processes. So you get the quality, but you get a fresh, updated look.
So with those, if not tonight, tomorrow,
Sure.
I'm going to take a peek at them. I'll be respectful of your time.
Yeah.
But will they resemble some, like, will I see a resemblance in those decoys to the decades ago versions?
You will, and we're very conscious of the fact that when you buy G&H, if you have an identity or a commitment to G&H, you're looking for something maybe a little bit different than you're getting from some of the other decoy companies. There are a lot of decoy companies in the market, and Joel, to be clear, beautiful products, beautiful decoys, well-made products. I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody else's decoy. But if you're coming to buy G&H, you're buying something a little bit different than what everybody else offers. So when we made the decision to do sort of this reset on the quality and the reset on the look and feel of the decoy also, we had to find somebody who had some of the same shared values that we have, and who had some of the same, what's the word I'm looking for, Ben? Had the same ideals about decoys and hunting that we did. And so we searched, and we went through a lot of decoy carvers. We had a very prominent decoy carver from another company come to us and ask if he could have the job, because he really loved the Made in America part of what we were doing. We eventually settled on Luke Costello, who came with us to the show here, because Luke and his style embodies so much of what people associate with G&H. He's a third-generation carver. He's won multiple, I'll screw up what the correct titles of the championships are, but he's won multiple national-level competitions. I think 8 is the number. I'm not a carved decoy guru the way that Luke is.
He'd be cringing if he was listening.
He's probably
going to
punch me in the face tomorrow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Luke had a lot of those ideals that we did. His decoys were beautiful. They had detail, but they weren't like he wasn't trying to recreate anatomical perfection.
Wasn't something that you sat on the shelf.
Right. It's a working decoy. There was some artistry to it, though, and there was some style to it, though. beyond just let's make. I mean, you could go get a taxidermy mounted duck and you could 3D scan it and you could make a perfect replica of a duck. But that's not what we set out to do, and that's not what Lucas set out to do. We wanted there to be some feel of heritage, but at the same time, that feel of heritage to have the detail and the precision and the things that we know the younger hunter is looking for.
Well, I think the stage of waterfowling that we're in right now, heritage, there's a reconnection with the heritage. The camouflage that you're wearing right now.
Definitely.
Right? The old school duck camo that my dad wore when I was a kid, and G&H. I think we could find other examples of just kind of reconnecting with our heritage. Some old A5 shotguns or things like that.
Yeah.
It's, it just is what it is. What do you think? So, American made, love it. Plus, the durability, the thicker shell, the thicker decoy. What are some of the other selling points of
Size.
Size?
Size for sure, and it's always a great discussion on personal preference. A lot of people think I'm ridiculous when I'll make the case for the Super Magnum, the biggest option every time. But the reality is, when the other companies' products are made so far away, and they're dealing with shipping logistics, it looks to me like they have made decisions related to size to try and increase the bang for the buck as far as getting from A to B. They can get
Decrease shipping costs. You can fit more in a
decrease shipping
container.
costs, boxes being smaller, cheaper to ship. That's all there is to it. So in general, and I don't have everybody's decoy laying here on the table as I analyze them. But in general, in a given apples to apples, we're a little bigger, just across the board.
Sure.
And I don't mean just the Super Mag, but what we would call a Magnum or what we would call a standard size. If you take just about anybody else's in the same species, we're just a little bigger. And for those hunters that prefer a little more, footprint on the water, we have what they're looking for.
Okay. I thought you would have said paint. I think the paint is.
When they talk about our paint, they quickly get to the point where they say it lasts longer. And what they usually mean is it sticks on the decoy better. It doesn't flake off. It doesn't chip. It doesn't peel. So, they can get it dirty. These guys, duck hunters are the best in the world at getting dirty, period. They're even better than little kids. They can get everybody's paint dirty. But when they need to clean them, they can scrub them. They can take our decoys and they can scrub them. They can break a power washer out and they can blast them. And there aren't any fails as a result of that. And then years and years and years of continued use, regardless of how they handle them, they hold up very well. We'll hear that all day long. Now, we may have an individual come along and say that, they would appreciate this color here be a little more like that color or something like that here and there. And again, that boils down to one person's opinion or personal preference or maybe the region where he's finding that particular species. We battle that best we can. But the reality is they do appreciate the paint, and it's usually related to some stage or some aspect of durability.
Well, looking forward to getting my hands on it. You guys, I don't know if you can bottle this vibe that you guys give off. I mean, you guys are obviously proud. The story, you need to make a short film about this, I think.
It's easy to get behind. We've been sitting here today at the trade show. We've got a 10x10 booth over here, and all day long, one after another, folks come up and they pick up the decoy, and if they're familiar with it at all, it usually followed by some sort of testimony.
Yeah.
And that's fun, and it is easy to be proud of. And truthfully, Ray and I haven't been involved long enough to really have any responsibility related to that at all, right? We inherited that. That was here when we got here.
Yeah.
We're proud of that. We're proud to stand behind where it is now. We're looking forward to where it's going, and we're working our butts off to make sure those kinds of things are still said about it long after we're not involved anymore, long after we're gone.
Yep. Ray, are you okay if we talk about what happened last night?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk
Yeah,
about it.
I think it's really impressive. No matter what conservation organization you would have done something like this for, it would have been impressive. But you did it for Delta, so I'm obviously biased. But last night we had the Duck Hunters Grand Banquet. It was like 800 people were in there, something like that.
Biggest banquet I've ever been to.
It was large.
Yeah, and we actually sold out. We actually had to turn some people away, which is interesting. But Ray, you stood up. Go ahead, take it from here.
Yeah, so we donated this little package. I guess we'll talk about the package in a second. But I stood up and I started by asking, look, for us, and if you had to pick a theme about what we've been talking about for the last however long we've been talking here, it's generational, right? It's like this sport or pastime, or whatever you want to call waterfowl hunting, it's generational. And we do it because maybe it wasn't passed down by a dad or a father, but it was passed down by somebody who took the care to give it to someone in the next generation. And the only way that it's going to survive is if we continue that generational approach and we think about the future instead of just thinking about my ducks and what I'm going to kill this season. I need to be thinking about the seasons that my sons and daughters are going to enjoy in a few years. And so I just stood up by asking everybody, like, show of hands, how many of y'all in here shot your first duck over a G&H decoy? And of the people who were in the room and were, listening and paying attention to the conversation, I would say more than half the people raised their hands. There's already that identity with G&H. And I tried to ask everybody, like, how many of y'all were a Delta member at the time that happened? And, Delta also has such an incredible legacy. I think the only organization at this show that is older than G&H is Delta.
1911.
1911.
Yeah.
And it's not just that, but Delta has shown this very, very serious commitment to the science and the research. And, the card says the Duck Hunters Organization, and that's the tagline that you see. It's there for the duck hunters, but it's there because of all this work that's being done by the research scientists and the trappers and the people that are ensuring that the resource exists for a future generation. So we wanted to try to find a way that we could give back, and we wanted to do something unique. I mean, anybody can just throw money at a problem, but we wanted to find some unique way to give back, and so we sponsored this package. It's 4 people. Come to Henrietta, come to the factory. We'll give you a tour of the factory during working hours while all of our staff and our employees are there. Come down, pull the lever, push the button on the machine, blow mold a few of your own decoys, take them and paint those decoys. It's 4 people. You can do it as a group. Spend an afternoon enjoying all this together. We get out of the factory. We go out into the water. We have some really cool historic spots very near our factory. I don't feel like I'm spot burning by saying this, but we've got some spots that are very, very well known in Oklahoma and have some real history and legacy to them. We'll go look around. We'll try to find ducks for the next day. We'll go to dinner together that evening. We'll get up early the next morning and we'll go hunt and enjoy a hunt together, enjoying that resource that Delta is working so hard to support and maintain. And then as soon as we get done with the hunt, we'll come back to the factory, and the winners of the package will walk through the factory and build a custom spread. Do you ever watch the show King of the Hill?
Yeah.
And there was that episode where Bobby wanted to go to the potato chip factory so he could eat a chip off the line, because that was like the freshest, best chip you could get. Well, we'll give you the chip off the line. You can come down to the factory, and you can literally pick them out of the drying room if you want to, and build yourself a custom spread, decoys, rigs, everything that you need to have that perfect decoy spread, and package them up and take them home. And so it's a unique thing that we don't think anybody else in the industry can kind of offer, and it's so cool. We've done these for a few other groups. We always get a huge response from these things. And so last night we offered the package, and it got bid up to a great amount of money. And then the guy that was second runner-up, that was the losing guy.
Well, it was very competitive all the way to.
Yeah. Oh, they were barking back and forth at each
gosh.
other. And the guy who came in second said, well, okay, I'll match that if you guys will do a second one. So we did a second one. And then we were standing on the side of the room having beers with our wives. And a Delta staffer came up and said, hey, there's a gentleman over here that wants to know if would you donate a third one to Delta if he will match that amount. And so we said, yeah, of course we'll do it. We're happy to.
Jeez.
So we tripled, what we originally raised, and we're proud of that. And at the same time, we've done a bunch of these, and we kind of enjoy them. Because you were joking at the beginning about, you don't want to overcommit to these, but with everything that's going on in the factory and as busy as we are, we don't often get time to hunt.
So,
and I think
I got it.
I can't speak for Ben's wife, but my wife is like, you've been gone, you're working all the time, and now you're telling me that you're going hunting on Saturday. So it's kind of nice. We get these folks in here. If they're willing to pay that kind of money for a package, they're obviously very serious about what they want to come do with us. And so it's nice to have a morning outside with somebody that if they've paid the money to do this, they believe in what Delta's doing also. So we already have that common bond.
Yeah.
So to go spend a morning with a group of people like that and enjoy the sunrise, and if we kill ducks, great. One of the best groups we had last year, the weather just didn't cooperate at all, and between the 4 of them, there was 1 duck killed, but they all said, this was so fantastic, we're going to buy this again next year and come do it again. So
That's cool. Do you mind if I say how much was
No,
generated?
go ahead.
Because it's huge.
And that's the point. And I think you're going to say the figure in a minute, but It really speaks volumes. We're not a reputable long-term hunting lodge. We're not professional hunting guides. We're going to take these folks hunting. We're going to be real in front of them. We're going to show them things. They spent this kind of money to come witness American manufacturing, to come see a part and where these things that they love come from, and just to be around us and go on a hunt. I mean,
And then go hunt with friends.
and this kind of money could have bought them an excellent experience with a lot of dead ducks and some fine meals in historic, great waterfowl lodges around the country.
Yep.
But instead, they donated serious chunk of change to Delta Waterfowl for the conservation impact it will have, and a sneak peek at what we're doing.
Yeah, no, $24,000 raised between those three. That's huge.
It's huge.
That's absolutely huge. I mean, that, just to put it into real terms, that'll fund a whole crew of researchers, summer technicians. That'll fund a whole project. That, when we put out hen houses, we put them out 100 at a time. So we build, install, maintain for 10 years 100 hen houses. We call that a super site. That costs us around $39,000. So the $24,000 gets you over halfway towards that.
I didn't even realize that. Makes me feel good about a lot of baby ducks that are going to be flying around.
It is. That's not insignificant. I promise you, that's more. I don't care how hard you hunt. That's more ducks raised each year than you guys are going to shoot. At least mallards. So.
Well, and to be clear, and I'm glad we spoke about it. I'm glad we talked about it, highlighted what it was. But the real heroes are those folks that spoke up and bought that, spent the money, and made that donation.
Yeah,
absolutely.
For Ray and I, it's going to be some mornings putting decoys in the water and doing things we like to do anyway. The real hero there are the guys that wrote that check.
Well, this is impressive. This is really inspiring, and I trust that you guys are inspiring many others. Please keep it up. And I don't know, it sounds weird to say I'm proud of you guys.
Thank you.
But yeah, that is a weird feeling, but that's what I'm feeling is pride, It's like I have something. I don't have anything to do with it, but I feel pride.
No, it's a testosterone. It's difficult for grown men to talk about feelings and even give each other compliments face to face. So no, we appreciate it.
Yeah, well, awesome. Well, I appreciate you spending your time here with me on this podcast, coming and supporting Delta, what you guys did last night, what you guys do in your everyday lives. Conservation is obviously runs deep in your veins, and I think making gear, selling gear, of course, you're making money. But,
Sure.
Be proud of that. But at the same time, to have that conservation ethic, giving back, that's really important to me. It's always kind of bothered me when it's just a take, profit, because hunters are conservationists, and industry leaders are too. But not enough put that conservation feeling, front and center, and you guys are doing that, and keep it up, motivate, and inspire others.
We appreciate it. Thanks for having us on.
You bet. Thanks for your time. We'll catch you later, guys.
Thank you.